Hello, my name is Jacob Roney, and this is my first rebuttal video in response to my brother's first rebuttal video and our first topic of our debate series, the burden of proof. If you haven't seen our videos so far, you may want to check them out to catch up, or you can read brief summaries below each video. Let's get right down to it. My brother's first point in his rebuttal video was that theists are not required to prove God's existence to themselves, but rather that they must prove God's existence to him. While he's certainly asked me in the past many times to provide the former, and I always did it gladly, I can only attempt to provide the latter as well. And my answer to that would be that I will. I will continue to provide for Aaron what I believe to be subjective evidence for God's existence in hopes that he may have faith as well. Love, emotions in general, rational thought, the complexities of life and the universe, all of which may serve their own self-evident purpose for the processes of evolution and or the laws of physics, but may equally possibly serve a more important and more fulfilling purpose than the laws of physics, which I can certainly appreciate. My brother's second point was that everyone is born an atheist. I actually agree. But just because an individual, just because a behavior or idea is learned does not mean it's not correct or any less possible to be correct. I'm going to use the idea of object permanence. When we are introduced the idea of object permanence at a young age, we start to believe that objects removed from our immediate line of sight continue to exist despite having objective evidence. This allows for children not to cry when their mothers leave the house temporarily, which is certainly good for the mother and the child. But in reality, without this learned behavior, if we only went off of our immediate objective evidence, there's ultimately a 50% chance that that person or entity still exists, and perhaps much less of a chance that they function similarly to how they did when we last saw them. My point here is that existence by nature includes mutually exclusive alternatives. That is to say, you cannot exist and not exist simultaneously unless you want to take the approach of quantum mechanics, which might even support my point that we are all just atoms popping in and out of existence, and we never truly fully exist at any given time. Nevertheless, we aren't surprised when we see the person who left us again. And while we all have our set lifetime, we all have to die someday, and we may assume a person's chances of coming home, so to speak, are on the general decline as they live their life, albeit variable. If we had all of the objective evidence, that is to say, if we knew when an individual was going to die, we would know that every single day their chances of not coming home are 0%. Up until that final day, on that sad day when they do not come home, the chance of them not coming home is 100%. Now, thankfully, our learned behavior of object permanence allows us to make an assumption of reality that is actually correct most of the time. That's why we're not surprised. Oh, they're still here. And I'm not sure if in the case of humans, object permanence is only for our own evolutionary, or if it serves to help our mind comprehend some form of continuity. In the case of God, it's not a matter of still existing, but a matter of existing. But my previous point was that existence by nature includes mutually exclusive alternatives that are equally possible. That is to say, if you have no current objective evidence that an entity or person exists, the baseline for whether or not they exist could not be set anywhere but 50%. I believe Aaron would agree with this. I would certainly submit to the fact that there's a 50% chance that the spaghetti monster exists, that Thor exists, that my concept of God exists, or any other possibly invoked existence of any kind. But even if we allow ourselves to only go off of our, or even if we say that in the future objective evidence can be obtained, still currently at this point, the baseline is 50%. And thus it boils down to you must make a forced decision whether or not to have faith either way. And in the case of object permanence, even though that faith is learned, it's not necessarily misguided, for it causes us to make an assumption that is generally correct on the whole. Think of it like this. The mother still exists before the child is born, right? And a child who was raised in the null hypothesis culture, let's say, would reject that he had a mother or any accounts of who his mother was until he was shown objective evidence of his birth, which may not have been available until recently. He would reject any concept of his mother or the fact that he was even born by natural processes without being shown objective evidence. But he would clearly be mistaken. He has a mother. A child raised in an agnostic culture would perhaps entertain the accounts of his mother and who she was as a person, and grant that there's a 50% chance that he had a mother and a 50% chance that he did not have a mother, and perhaps a much less chance, albeit still a chance, that she was somewhat similar to the accounts provided of her. Now, a child raised in an environment where there's a learned behavior that every child is taught that every child has a mother, and if the mother survives childbirth, she will love her child unconditionally. That child may, that child may have faith that his mother existed. Certainly, I would not let him make the claim that she existed as fact, because that's still not. He doesn't have the objective evidence. But he's certainly allowed to believe that his mother exists or existed, and he's certainly allowed to believe that she was somewhat similar to the accounts given about her. Let's see. The point here is that he would make, well, I guess he would make two assumptions. One, that he had a mother, which that would be correct. His second assumption, granted by this forced learned behavior by the community, would be that his mother would love him unconditionally if she were around. Now, the first assumption is correct. He did in fact have a mother. It was not misguided. The second assumption, that his mother would love him unconditionally, may or may not be correct, but in any case, it's equally possible. And it certainly doesn't hurt to believe. This brings up Aaron's next point, that he doesn't like it when beliefs are applied to the world as fact. As I just mentioned, I certainly agree. I don't think it would be right for that child to say, I had a mother and she was like this and you should all believe it. He doesn't know that. But there's no error or problem with him professing his faith that he had a mother and that she would have loved him very much. Let's see. Let me access my notes here. I lost my place of what I was going to say next. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Worst case scenario, the boy would create a placebo effect, perhaps for himself and or others, of a mother's love. I don't see any problem in that. For me, my beliefs must be rational, they must be comfortable, and they must be ethical. My interpretation of God fits those criteria for myself. Any belief that you have, I would hope that they fit those criteria as well. If you find two equally rational alternatives and one of them is more comforting or ethical to you, I would advise the more comfortable or ethical alternative. I believe in a God that is omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient, who created this universe. I'm just going to put that out there right in the raw. So, to Aaron's point that he dismisses all the gods and I dismiss all the gods but my own, that's not entirely true. My view of God is pluralistic in nature and inclusive in nature in terms of salvation. I'm sure we may have a debate topic about this in the future. Thus, any other interpretations that submit God as an entity that is all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing, and the creator of this universe, I could find, for myself, subjective evidence to have faith towards that type of God. However, considering omni-anything is far beyond my capacity to comprehend, I can only assume that perhaps when we all discuss our own interpretation of God, we may in fact be speaking of the same deity or same entity without knowing it. In the future, I'm sure I'll have to provide support why I believe my God may be more plausible than others, but that will come with time, and I certainly, as I said earlier, will not submit that mine is any more correct, just as an objective fact, but to myself seems to make more sense as to what the nature of God would be like. That will certainly be a difficult task. To Aaron's final point, if he agrees that it's equally possible that a supreme being does or does not exist, you have nothing to lose by choosing to live as though he does. Some people would call this Pascal's wager. Some people think it diminishes the meaning of having faith, but it's a rational belief, and considering the alternatives are equally likely, if one belief is more comforting or ethical than the other, much like the boy that professes in his belief in his mother's love despite never having got to meet her, then there's no problem in that. I would think that even if it's a placebo effect, so to speak, of that love that may not truly exist, of a mother's love that isn't really there, or God's love that may not be really there, there's nothing wrong with asserting the belief as long as you're not asserting it as fact or pushing that belief on another in a violent manner. In terms of civil rights and things like that, my brother and I are pretty much in total agreement. We support equal rights for everyone. That is completely irrelevant of my religious beliefs, though my religious beliefs, my concept of God would include being all-loving. He would love all his creatures equally and want them to all have the same respect. I heard an interesting quote the other day that we should not treat others as we would like to be treated, but we should treat others as they would like to be treated. I thought that was interesting. I thought I'd just throw that in here as a tidbit at the end, that what we may want as someone to treat us may not be the same type of treatment that others would prefer. I hope you found this video educational in some regard. I look forward to creating other videos in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and have yourself a wonderful day.